We are we're constantly absorbing these messages, right? That tell us we have to lean in. You
Yeah.
have to engage with conflict. You have to solve problems head on, push through everything by just, doubling down.
Right, with sheer force of will. It's this very confrontational model of personal growth.
Exactly. And if you find yourself struggling, the advice you usually get, especially in, say, professional or peer support spaces, is that you just have to engage harder.
Yeah, try harder. Show up more. Be more vulnerable.
But what if that entire idea is profoundly flawed, especially when your mental health is already, fragile?
What if the most powerful thing you can do isn't pushing forward?
What if the strongest, most growth-oriented action you can take in some really specific situations
Mm.
is actually to turn around, create some distance, and just walk away?
It's a total and completely necessary reframing of what power even is.
How so?
Well, for anyone who's navigating these big systems of like complex mental health services,
Mm-hmm.
disability supports, even, very intimate peer communities,
Yeah.
the power dynamics are almost always skewed against the individual, heavily. And choosing to disengage, to walk away, is almost never framed as a strategy.
It's framed as a failure, like you gave up.
Precisely, as a failure. And that is a huge problem.
And that is exactly what we are here to challenge today. We're doing a deep dive into the, I think, really essential and groundbreaking work of Nissa Pasha.
Mm-hmm.
She's known as an executive political health guru, a peer counselor, an educator, and someone who proudly calls herself a soldier of health and technology.
And the material we're looking at today, it's this really powerful peer reflection. It's all about self-evaluation, about recalibration,
And it's aimed very specifically, right?
very specifically, at people whose main goal isn't just surviving, but sustaining their mental health while they are inside these complex, often high-stakes community and care spaces.
So it's about longevity.
It is.
Yeah.
Pasha's work is really trying to inspire a unique perception of mental health awareness. The focus shifts very decisively toward proactive harm reduction.
Proactive, not reactive.
Exactly. This isn't just about, managing symptoms after a conflict happens. It's about building a whole framework, a framework for dignity, for autonomy, for ethical self-protection within these systems.
And using language that gives you, the individual, some real objective power.
That's the key, objective power.
So our mission in this deep dive is to basically give you, our listener, a shortcut, a way to really thoroughly grasp the critical difference between just avoiding conflict.
Which is often, impulsive, it's driven by fear, it's full of guilt.
Right. The difference between that and what Pasha calls lawful disengagement, which is strategic, it's rights-based.
A world of difference.
So we're going to unpack Pasha's 3 key concepts.
Mm.
They're all interconnected, and they give us the language and the strategy to move from just surviving to actually sustaining our stability.
And those concepts are lawful isolation, passive projections, and the absolute necessity of ethical boundaries.
This is the framework that lets us name the harm we're feeling, even when it's subtle, and then gives us a strategy to exit it with our integrity intact.
And that clarity is it's crucial. Because when harm is subtle, when it's under the surface, it can make you feel like you're going crazy.
Absolutely.
But when you can name it,
Yeah.
you can finally address it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with a feeling, a psychological phenomenon that I think almost every single person listening, anyone who's been in a close community, a support group, even a workplace, will recognize immediately.
Mm-hmm.
You walk into a space, and on the surface, everything looks totally fine.
No one's yelling. There's no obvious fight happening.
Nothing. But you just feel profoundly off.
Yes, that feeling.
Drained, maybe you feel a little shaky, or you suddenly feel this intense hypervigilance, like you have to watch everything you say and do.
Even though you can't point to one specific thing, there was no overt incident that should have triggered that feeling.
That feeling is exactly the kind of unspoken, simmering harm that the source material is talking about.
It is. It's when the emotional atmosphere in a room is just thick with something,
Hmm.
but the source of that toxicity is invisible.
And Pasha points out this is especially common in mental health peer spaces, right?
Yes, and for a very logical reason. By their very nature, these environments bring together people who are dealing with deep, often unresolved issues. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they might lack the established healthy coping mechanisms to process their own internal struggles cleanly.
So that internal struggle kind of leaks out.
It leaks out. It bleeds into the space.
And Nissa Pasha gives us the perfect, incredibly precise term to describe what's actually going on in that space. She calls it passive projection.
And what's so fascinating about this concept is how it's different from just, general negativity or someone being in a bad mood.
It's more specific.
Much more specific. Passive projection is what happens when someone's unresolved internal issues, and this could be anything, deep-seated beliefs, intense emotions, fears, dysfunctional behaviors, are unconsciously or indirectly placed onto somebody else.
So instead of dealing with their own stuff.
Right. They can't manage it. So they subtly, and often it's through nonverbal or really indirect ways, they just sort of dump it on you.
And that is exactly where the exhaustion comes from, because the really tricky part is that it's indirect.
Yes. That's the core of it.
It's not a direct confrontation. You can't respond to it with logic or assertiveness or, a clear boundary, because what are you setting a boundary against?
What are you even responding to?
It might just be a loaded question that has seemingly nothing to do with the conversation, or just a weird, unsettling, lingering vibe after you talk to someone.
Or maybe a backhanded compliment that leaves you questioning your own reality for the next 3 hours.
Exactly. Oh, it's so great to see you're doing so well, considering everything.
Oof, yes.
Yeah.
That one. And you're left holding this emotional parcel that was never yours to begin with, and there's no clear return address. You can't even give it back.
Because it lacks that open, definable conflict, it is just notoriously difficult to identify while it's happening. It's so hard to name.
Which makes it functionally impossible to defend against using any of our normal conflict resolution tools.
Which is why just giving it the name passive projection is so, so empowering.
It gives you a hook to hang the feeling on.
The source material doesn't just leave this as some abstract idea, though. It gets very specific about how passive projection actually shows up in real-world interactions, especially in peer spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to really dig into these, because these are the tools for identifying it.
We absolutely have to. The first major way it shows up is through insinuation.
Okay.
The source describes this as little comments that have a hidden jab.
A hidden jab.
Yeah. These are remarks that are designed to destabilize you or maybe undermine your credibility, but they're often delivered with a smile or a shrug, or they're disguised as, just a helpful suggestion or a friendly concern.
Can we workshop that? What does that actually sound like in a peer group setting?
Absolutely. So a healthy, supportive peer interaction might be someone asking you, hey, how are you managing your transition back to work? Is there anything we can do? It's direct. It's supportive.
Clear.
An insinuation, on the other hand, might sound something like this. Someone says to the group, it's just so interesting how some people in this group talk about making progress, but then we still see them struggling with the basics. And then they turn to you and say, are you sure you're ready to take on that big new responsibility?
Wow. Okay. That's brutal.
It's brutal. The direct statement is just a generalized observation, totally undeniable, but the timing, the tone, the context, it makes it crystal clear that the hidden jab is meant for you.
And it forces you to defend yourself against something you haven't even been directly accused of.
And that's the trap.
Because if you react with anger, you look unstable, you're overreacting.
They prove their point.
And if you ignore it, the projection just lands. And it sits with you, and it chips away at your confidence. It's a lose-lose.
It is a perfect trap. The second manifestation is, I think, even more unsettling. It's the experience of observation without consent.
Okay.
This is the behavior that creates that creepy feeling that you're being watched, that you're being constantly monitored.
Where someone is paying way too much attention to your movements or your social interactions or even your social media.
Far beyond what's normal or reciprocal or professionally necessary. It's just watching.
Now, this feels particularly tricky in peer support or disability systems because some level of monitoring might actually be part of the care plan.
Right.
So how do you tell the difference between necessary oversight and this really harmful kind of observation?
The bright line, is entirely about consent and purpose.
Consent and purpose.
Necessary oversight is transparent, it's time-limited, and it's aimed at a clear, objective safety goal or some other agreed-upon outcome. Observation without consent, on the other hand, is often persistent, it's not transparent, and its purpose is to gather data for, subjective judgment.
Or for gossip.
Or for rumor, or for control. It completely changes the dynamic. It transforms you from an autonomous person into a subject of constant, uninvited scrutiny.
So the difference between a care coordinator tracking your medication adherence, which is necessary.
And consensual, hopefully.
Right. Versus a peer who is constantly monitoring who you talk to in the group, where you go on the weekends, what you post online, and then making these little loaded comments about it.
That's a perfect example. That is passive projection in action.
And the third manifestation brings it all together. It's indirect communication and repeated attention that crosses boundaries.
This isn't just one unwanted email or text. It's the persistent pattern.
Right, the pattern.
The continual attempts to get in touch, the follow-up messages when you haven't replied, the unsolicited feedback on your life that you never asked for, all of it ultimately undermines your autonomy and your basic right to privacy.
When you put all three of those together, the insinuation, the observation, the boundary crossing, it creates this environment of like low-grade psychological warfare.
It really does. The projector maintains their own sense of stability by externalizing their chaos onto you. And it forces you to use up all your energy just trying to decode their ambiguity.
And that decoding process, that constant mental effort, is precisely why the source material stresses that these subtle behaviors are not just minor annoyances.
No, not at all. They are genuinely damaging.
This is a critical point that the source really drives home. Why does this kind of subtle harm do so much real damage?
Well, for one, it completely erodes trust. It makes the person on the receiving end constantly second-guess their own perceptions.
Am I being too sensitive? Did I just imagine that little jab? Am I misreading the whole room?
It distorts your reality. And that puts this immense psychological strain on people, especially people who are already dedicating huge amounts of their cognitive resources just to navigating complex systems.
Right. If you're a consumer, if you're a disabled adult, you already have to carefully monitor your own behavior just to be seen as cooperative or compliant enough to get the support you need.
You're already performing to some extent.
Exactly. So layering on this need to decode veiled hostility from the very peers or providers who are supposed to be supporting you, it creates a state of constant debilitating hypervigilance.
And hypervigilance is it's exhausting.
It's your body living in a perpetual state of threat. You're always waiting for the next little comment, the next weird look, the next unwanted observation to land.
The outcome is inevitable. It's confusion, it's profound anxiety, and ultimately, it's total emotional exhaustion.
Pasha has this wonderful, very memorable phrase for it. She calls it death by 1,000 paper cuts.
It's perfect, isn't it? It's not one big, massive trauma that you can point to. It's the cumulative effect, the low-grade, relentless exposure to ambiguity and violation that just burns out your nervous system.
And it makes any kind of long-term stability feel completely impossible.
You can't build on shaky ground.
So if we connect passive projection to the bigger picture, the source material draws some really powerful lines to other, more recognized forms of relational harm.
It does. It directly connects passive projection to things like passive aggression.
Which relies on that indirect hostility instead of just honest, accountable communication.
Right. And maybe more importantly, it connects it to stalking behaviors.
Which rely on unwanted attention and monitoring rather than on consent.
That connection to stalking behavior is so jarring, but it's so important for anyone listening to really hear that.
Why is it so important?
Because it elevates these little comments and this extra attention from just, poor social skills or bad manners into the category of serious violations of safety and self-governance.
It's not just annoying, it's a violation.
It is. It forces us to acknowledge the really destructive impact of unwanted, persistent attention, even if that attention doesn't come with an explicit physical threat.
So the core message here is that both of these things, passive aggression and unwanted attention, they undermine your autonomy and your safety.
Deeply. And when these kinds of subtle behaviors are normalized or just tolerated within peer spaces that are supposed to be sanctuaries for healing, they create environments where people feel watched and managed.
Instead of supported and respected.
Exactly. And that just chips away at the core integrity you need for any kind of genuine community.
So recognizing this, seeing it for what it is, requires a really powerful, really strategic response.
And a response that is not based on escalating the conflict.
Which brings us perfectly to the solution. If the problem is subtle, persistent, and basically impossible to fight head-on,
then the strategy has to be one of dignified retreats.
So we've established passive projection as this insidious, simmering harm. It's hard to name. It's even harder to fight directly without making yourself look like the problem.
Right.
Now, the conventional wisdom would tell us to engage, to have a dialogue, to try to work it out, find common ground.
The source material says absolutely not.
The solution isn't trying to negotiate with someone who is projecting or trying to force them to change. The solution is making a strategic, empowered choice to protect your own space.
It's about self-governing your participation. You shift from fighting this hopeless battle of trying to get external validation to asserting absolute internal self-governance.
If you can't make the chaos stop,
You remove yourself from the chaos. It's that simple and that profound.
this takes us directly to the core solution that Pasha provides, which is lawful isolation. And we have to be so precise in defining this term.
We do, because the word isolation carries so much negative baggage, especially in mental health conversations. It's often associated with punishment or self-neglect or a symptom of depression.
But this is different.
Completely different. Lawful isolation is defined as the ethical, the intentional, and the legal choice to limit or completely remove contact with people, places, or situations that cause you harm, that destabilize you, or that result in repeated boundary violations.
Ethical, intentional, and legal. Those three adjectives feel incredibly deliberate.
They are. It frames this as a conscious, grounded, and rights-based decision. It's not an impulsive or hostile retreat out of anger. It's a calculated move for self-preservation.
Okay, but I think a lot of people listening, when they hear the word isolation combined with walk away, they're going to instinctively think, isn't that just avoidance? Isn't that just being antisocial? Am I just failing to work through a conflict? We have to address that friction head on.
That is the single most important distinction to make.
Mhm.
Lawful isolation is emphatically not punishment. It's not rejection. It's not hostility. It's not just being antisocial.
So what's the difference between this and avoidance?
Avoidance is usually reactionary. It's driven by fear or maybe guilt, and often the conflict just follows you anyway because you haven't resolved anything internally.
Right.
Lawful isolation, on the other hand, is proactive. It's driven by self-respect and the assertion of your objective rights. It's a clean break.
So it is a form of self-governance, a form of self-protection, but that word lawful seems to be doing a lot of the work here because it's so much weight, especially in a professional or peer context. Why that specific word?
Because the word lawful grounds the entire action in objective rights, not just in your subjective feelings. It affirms your inherent legal right to privacy, your right to consent to who has access to you, your right to freedom from harassment, coercion, surveillance, or any unwanted attention.
So by framing it as lawful isolation, you're shifting the ethical burden.
Precisely. You're not just saying, I feel like I don't want to talk to you right now. You are asserting, my right to privacy and my right to freedom from harassment requires me to ethically and legally limit your access to me.
That terminology gives the boundary an objective weight. It's much harder to dismiss than just someone's feelings, which can often be invalidated in these kinds of environments.
Oh, you're just being too sensitive. You can't say that to a rights-based claim.
And this emphasis is so important for consumers and for disabled adults. The source specifically notes that this group is, and I'm quoting, often expected to tolerate behaviors that others would not.
Yes. There's this enormous, subtle pressure to be cooperative or compliant, because you might be relying on those support systems or community connections.
There's a fear that if you set a boundary, you could jeopardize your access to care or your social standing in the group.
And that fear of losing care, is what forces people to become passive recipients of harm. They just tolerate it.
So choosing lawful isolation becomes this revolutionary act. It's a way of affirming the necessary boundary, and it becomes this core statement of your personal rights.
It's a declaration. The declaration is, I do not have to remain accessible to what harms me in order to be considered cooperative, compliant, or worthy of care.
It just severs the link between tolerating dysfunction and receiving dignity or support.
It says, my dignity is not conditional on my tolerance of your projection.
Okay, here's where it gets really transformative for me, and I think it will for our listeners. This concept completely flips conventional thinking about personal growth on its head. We are taught almost religiously that growth always comes from engagement, from vulnerability, from staying in the difficult conversation.
And yet, the source posits the exact opposite. And I'll quote it because it's so powerful. Growth does not always come from engagement. Sometimes it comes from lawful disengagement.
That's huge.
It's huge. We often mistakenly confuse constant proximity or forced engagement with necessary psychological growth. But real sustainable healing actually requires a foundation of stability and peace. You can't grow in a war zone.
If engagement means constantly having your nervous system set on fire and your resources drained by managing someone else's passive projection, that is not growth.
That's not growth. That is stagnation. It's attrition. You're just losing ground every day.
So if engagement is actually counterproductive, then stepping back, lawful disengagement, is a highly proactive way to move forward.
You're prioritizing clarity.
Yeah.
You're prioritizing stability. You're prioritizing the restoration of your own internal resources. You are consciously making space for actual healthy growth to happen.
And that kind of growth requires peace, not constant drama.
Exactly.
So what is the crucial function of lawful isolation in the real world, in those day-to-day peer dynamics?
Its function is both immediate and strategic. It interrupts the harmful pattern without escalating the conflict.
How does it do that?
Well, if the person projecting thrives on getting a reaction from you, and they usually do, lawful isolation simply removes that fuel.
You're not giving them anything to work with?
Nothing. It is designed to remove their access to you, rather than engaging with and therefore fueling the toxic dynamic. It's a clean break, and it's designed to preserve your energy.
So by strategically withdrawing, you protect those three vital resources you mentioned earlier: your nervous system,
Your cognitive clarity so you can think straight.
and your capacity for healthy, consensual relationships with other people.
Yes. Think about it. If you are in a constant state of emotional debt because you're dealing with other people's projections, if you're always hypervigilant, always trying to decode their ambiguities, you have zero capacity left to build genuine, safe connection.
You're just too tired.
You're exhausted. Lawful isolation creates the necessary energetic and psychological buffer. It's a strategy of resource management, plain and simple, and it allows you to focus on the things that actually build stability, which we'll get to later.
Okay, so if passive projection is the toxic substance we're trying to avoid,
Mm-hmm.
and lawful isolation is our core defense strategy,
Right.
we now need to understand how that toxic substance actually travels. How does it from them to us?
This is where Pasha moves us from just identifying a behavior to actually mapping the entire system of harm.
And she introduces a new term for this: passive trajectories.
Yes, these are the specific channels, the pathways through which those unresolved issues are transmitted from the projector to the recipient.
And this feels important because it moves the discussion beyond just saying, I need to avoid this person.
It demands a much more specific level of discernment. Understanding these channels is absolutely essential because it allows you to stop seeing the harm as just this, generalized anxiety or this pervasive negativity.
Like a cloud you can't get out of.
Exactly. And you start seeing it as specific points of infiltration, points that can be identified and then strategically shut down using that principle of lawful isolation.
Okay, let's break down these channels because this is what gives us the precision we need for self-protection. Pasha identifies three categories of passive trajectories.
People, places, and things.
Let's start with the first and probably most obvious one: people.
This channel refers to the specific individuals who are actively and persistently engaging in those projection mechanisms we talked about.
The indirect comments, the constant uninvited observation, the repeated unsolicited contact.
Right. These are the human conduits, the people who cannot or simply will not respect your boundaries and your basic right to privacy.
But this needs some nuance, right? Because in a peer support setting, people are supposed to check in on each other. That's part of the deal.
It is.
So when does a caring follow-up text become a passive trajectory? Where's that line?
The line, again, comes back to intention and consent. A caring check-in is usually reciprocal. Respect silence. If you don't reply, the person doesn't hound you. And it's usually a response to a previously agreed upon need or conversation.
A passive trajectory acting through a person is different.
It's very different. It often ignores clear signs that you want to disengage. It pursues contact under false pretenses like just checking in over and over again when no check-in was ever requested. And it uses those indirect comments to try and control you or gauge your state of being for their own purposes.
So the key is the persistence despite a demonstrated boundary or a clear lack of consent.
That's the tell. It's not about the one text. It's about the pattern of ignoring your no.
Okay, the second channel extends this idea beyond just individuals to the environment itself, places.
Yes. These are environments. It could be a community center, an online forum, a specific treatment center, or even a workplace where the culture itself normalizes surveillance, rumor, or monitoring.
This is a really crucial distinction because it means you can enact lawful isolation from the location itself, even if the one specific person who bothers you isn't even there that day.
Exactly. The harm in a place as a trajectory isn't just about one person's behavior. It's about a culture that tolerates or maybe even actively encourages intrusion, gossip, and what the source calls coercive proximity,
Coercive proximity.
forcing connection where it isn't wanted or healthy. Think about a community space where every single discussion eventually devolves into speculation about who's struggling the most or who is failing to meet their recovery goals.
If the space itself thrives on that kind of speculation or monitoring, the space becomes the trajectory.
The space itself becomes the channel for the harm. It harms everyone who participates, regardless of who's actually speaking at that moment.
So healthy peer communities should be grounded in transparency, in mutual confidentiality, in respect for autonomy.
And when the culture of that place shifts to one that rewards rumor and surveillance, that physical or digital space becomes toxic. Lawful isolation might just mean choosing not to go to that specific meeting or not participating in that particular online group, even if the stated intentions of the group seem good.
Even if you like most of the people there.
Even then, you're isolating from the culture, not just the people.
And finally, the third channel, which is arguably the most contemporary and insidious, is things.
This covers the use of technology, systems, routines, or even physical objects that are specifically used to maintain attention or control over someone without their informed, enthusiastic consent.
We need to do a deep dive here because technology is so deeply embedded in how we receive care and connect with peers now.
It's everywhere. Think about things like mandatory reporting systems in certain programs or shared organizational calendars, or even the explosion of peer-run social media groups. These things are all designed for coordination and connection.
But they can be co-opted.
They can be co-opted or weaponized to maintain unnecessary attention or control over an individual's private life.
Can you give us a concrete example of a thing being weaponized as a trajectory in a peer setting?
Sure. Imagine a peer community that requires all its members to use a shared digital scheduling system to coordinate events. On its face, that's totally reasonable.
Practice.
Right. But let's say this system also has a feature that allows any member to see when other members have logged in, what documents they viewed on the platform, or even how long they spent online.
Okay, I see where this is going.
If individuals in that group start using that technological feature to monitor who's engaging, who's withdrawing, who seems to be avoiding a group.
And then those observations start fueling those little insinuations we talked about.
Now, the digital platform, the thing, has become a passive trajectory. It's an object being used to facilitate observation without consent.
So the harm isn't the technology itself, it's the abuse of the technology to facilitate unwanted control or monitoring.
Precisely. If a system is being used to monitor you without your consent in a way that undermines your autonomy, that system becomes a passive trajectory that you must lawfully isolate yourself from.
So what would that look like in practice?
It might mean you still need to participate in the community, but you can ethically refuse to use that specific trajectory, the tracking software, for example, that compromises your boundaries. You are thereby enacting lawful isolation on the thing itself.
This whole recognition process, learning to spot the harmful people, places, and things, this is what Pasha calls gaining greater discernment.
It is. It's the ability to clearly distinguish what genuinely supports your well-being and autonomy from what is actively undermining it.
Discernment means understanding that if you engage with a certain place where rumor is the norm, or you use a certain thing that enables unsolicited control, you are basically opening the door for projection to come in.
And this level of analysis is so crucial for peers and consumers who often have to maintain some level of participation in these systems to get support.
They can't just walk away from everything.
No. But if they can't completely disengage from the entire system, they can at least identify and isolate themselves from the harmful trajectories within that system. It gives them a kind of surgical control.
And it prevents that all-or-nothing thinking where the entire system gets written off as just toxic?
Exactly. It shifts the focus from this whole system is bad to a much more empowered stance. These specific channels of harm within this system must be closed to me.
That is incredibly empowering. It's about taking back control on a micro level. Okay, so we've identified the harm, that's passive projection. We've laid out the strategic defense, which is lawful isolation. And we've mapped the mechanisms of travel, the passive trajectories.
We have the full threat model now.
Exactly. So now we have to transition into the long-term application of all this. Because the true goal of this work isn't just to win a single battle.
No, it's about ending the war.
It's about that definitive shift from living in constant survival mode, that exhausting feeling of Always reacting, always justifying, always putting out fires.
To establishing what the source calls maintenance mode.
And what is maintenance mode?
Maintenance mode is that sustained, stable, and resilient way of living that is meticulously designed on purpose. It doesn't happen by accident.
It's about building a structure and a discipline that supports long-term sustainability, not just scrambling to survive the next emotional disruption or boundary violation.
It's proactive living.
So, what's the first practical step in building this sustainable structure? According to Pasha, it's something called intentional consumption.
And this idea expands way beyond just food, although obviously nutrition is important. Pasha stresses being rigorously intentional about everything what I consume.
So, what does that include?
It includes information, media, the environments you put yourself in,
Yeah.
the relationships you maintain, and the obligations you agree to.
The source material offers this really powerful, very concise rule that I think should stick with every single person listening. It's simply consumption is participation.
That's it. It's so clear. If you consume toxic information, if you're constantly doom scrolling on social media or you're engaging in gossip, you are participating in the spread of projection.
If you choose to participate in chaotic environments, or you accept draining obligations that you know you can't handle, you are actively participating in your own destabilization.
Intentional consumption means you curate your life. Everything you choose to participate in should be actively supporting your clarity, your stability, and your long-term health. It's like a protective filtering system for your entire life.
So if you know that certain news sources always trigger your hypervigilance, lawful isolation applies not just to people, but to the information coming from those sources. You stop consuming it.
Exactly. You turn it off. And beyond that careful consumption, Pasha emphasizes organization and forward planning. These are the pillars of structure that support your resilience.
Now, some of these might sound like very basic life management skills.
They do. But when you view them through this lens, through the lens of mental health stability and as a defense against projection, they become absolutely crucial defense mechanisms.
Okay, let's break down these 4 pillars of structure, because this is the foundation that makes it possible to use lawful isolation without feeling guilty or fearing that your life will collapse.
The very first pillar is education.
And this isn't just academic learning.
No, not at all. This is self-education about your condition, about your rights, and about the nature of these relational dynamics we're talking about. The more you know about systems, about self-governance, about emotional intelligence, the harder it is for someone's passive projection to distort your reality.
Education gives you that objective framework you need for discernment.
It does. If you are educated on your rights, let's say your HMOPA rights or your rights regarding privacy in a specific care setting, you can spot the difference between legitimate oversight and a trajectory that is trying to monitor you without your consent. Knowledge is power.
Okay, pillar 2.
The second pillar is effective communication. This means learning how to communicate your boundaries clearly, assertively, and very importantly, neutrally.
Especially when you're in the act of enacting lawful isolation.
Especially then. When your communication is organized and precise, it reduces the ambiguity. And ambiguity is what projectors rely on to insert their insinuation. Good communication doesn't apologize for a necessary boundary. It just states it.
The third pillar is one that I think often surprises people when we talk about mental health. It's financial responsibility. How on earth does being financially responsible act as a shield against passive projection?
Financial stability is freedom. It's as simple as that.
Sure.
If you are constantly in a state of financial instability, you are structurally more dependent on environments or jobs or systems that might require you to tolerate boundary violations in exchange for security.
You can't afford to walk away.
You can't. Financial organization provides a buffer. It reduces what we could call your compliance exposure. If you know you have resources, even a small cushion, you are exponentially more empowered to enact lawful isolation from a toxic job or a harmful living situation or a draining service provider. It just reduces the leverage that other people have over your participation.
So financial stability translates directly into psychological autonomy.
Absolutely, 100%. And the final pillar is the thoughtful use of time and energy.
This involves discipline around your schedule, your commitments.
Yes, when your time and your energy are well managed, you are simply less vulnerable to the chaotic demands of a projector. You have established clear limits on when and how you are even accessible. This kind of planning reflects a deep commitment to your own growth without chaos and progress without burnout.
When you look at those four pillars together, education, communication, financial responsibility, and time and energy management, they're not flashy or glamorous,
Not at all.
but they are the absolute bedrock that allows you to shift from just reacting to dysfunction to actually living an intentional life.
And this internal structure that you build for yourself, it inherently informs the integrity of the peer community itself.
How so?
Well, if every member of a community is focused on lawful disengagement and self-governance, it raises the standard for interaction exponentially. The baseline for acceptable behavior goes way up.
This brings us to this essential concept of community integrity, the idea that healthy peer communities have to rely on lawful conduct, appropriate boundaries, and a mutual respect for one another's autonomy and space.
The source is very clear on this. It says these communities do not thrive on intrusion, rumor, or coercive proximity.
So if a group actually relies on rumor to function, or it requires this constant non-consensual sharing to maintain its sense of cohesion,
It has become a trajectory itself. The whole place is a trajectory, and lawful isolation must be applied to it.
this means that true empowerment isn't just, doing your internal therapeutic work. It's about making external choices that reflect your highest values.
Yes, empowerment means aligning your actions with your stated goal of stability, instead of continuing to engage with dysfunction just because it's familiar, or because it's expected, or because it makes other people comfortable.
When you establish the structure and you commit to this maintenance mode, your whole intention for moving forward changes. You're not just trying to survive anymore.
No.
So let's bring it all together. What does this all mean for the listener's daily life? If you put lawful isolation and maintenance mode together, what is that ultimate intention for moving forward?
The intention is clarity, it's discipline, and it's absolute self-respect. It's the conscious decision to quote the source, to release what compromises my well-being, to disengage from patterns that thrive on disruption, and to move forward with clarity, discipline, and self-respect.
That's the ultimate definition of alignment, isn't it? It's not disengaging from life.
Not at all. It is alignment with your own dignity and your own stability. It's the radical act of refusing to be destabilized for the comfort or the unmet needs of other people.
It's the move from being passively managed by your circumstances and all the chaos around you.
To actively governing your participation in the world.
That's the goal.
That's everything.
We started this deep dive by challenging the really widespread conventional belief that psychological growth and relational success always require more engagement, more exposure, more pushing through.
Right, the lean-in philosophy.
Exactly. But what Nissa Pasha's framework gives us is not just an alternative. It's a strategic, rights-based approach to our own well-being.
I think the main takeaway here is just so profound. Choosing not to participate in harmful dynamics isn't avoidance. It's a form of active strategic alignment.
You're not running away from conflict.
No, you are actively moving towards your own health, your own peace, and your own core values. It is a proactive, intentional step towards sustainability.
This framework gives us that powerful language to finally name the subtle, insidious harm of passive projection. That feeling of being watched or subjected to insinuation, which is so corrosive, especially in peer support settings.
And by naming the passive trajectories, the people, the places, the things that channel that harm, we gain the objective discernment we need to implement the solution.
The rights-based solution. Lawful isolation.
Lawful isolation takes that abstract idea of an emotional boundary and it grounds it in these objective principles of autonomy, privacy, and freedom from harassment. It's the mechanism that lets us shift into that long-term maintenance mode.
Which is supported by those four pillars of structure, ensuring that stability can finally become our default state rather than this distant goal we're always chasing.
Right.
And all of this leads us to the really powerful conclusion from the source material, which I think brilliantly resolves the paradox of boundaries, that fear that if you set boundaries, you'll end up all alone. The source says, lawful isolation and ethical boundaries are not barriers to connection. They are necessary conditions for safe, healthy participation.
That's everything. The purpose isn't to build a fortress to keep all people out of your life forever.
No.
It is to build a safe, structurally sound space so that when connections do happen, they are genuinely consensual, they're reciprocal, they're safe.
The boundaries aren't there to stop connection. They're there to make sure the connections you do welcome are real.
That they're rooted in mutual respect, and that they contribute to, rather than drain, your hard-won stability. This commitment to self-governance, that is the highest form of mental health revival.
So we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to take into your week, something to really mull over that builds directly on these ideas of self-governance and alignment.
Okay.
Look objectively at your life right now, your environments, your digital obligations, your most taxing relationships, and just ask yourself this one question. What does your current well-being, your peace, your sanity require you to lawfully disengage from?